I came home from the grocery store, arms full of bags, and saw his boots missing from the mat by the door. Then I heard him upstairs, laughing on the phone saying, "She's just not the one I wanted," before he walked out with a duffel bag and a smirk I didn't recognize. This is a story of picking up the pieces when the life you built falls apart and figuring out who you are when the person you trusted most turns into a stranger. Turns out, he'd been seeing someone else for months. Before we get into the story, let us know where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe. Hey, so I've got this story I've been meaning to tell you. It's a lot, but stick with me, okay? It's about me, Bryn Hadley, and how my whole world got flipped around. I'm 34, living just outside Boise, Idaho, in this little brick house with a lawn that's more weeds than grass and a porch swing that groans every time you sit on it. I've got hazel eyes that crinkle up when I laugh, used to laugh a lot anyway, and I'm always twisting my auburn hair into this messy bun that's more habit than style. I work at the library, shelving books, which is perfect for me because it's quiet and I can just be. And then there's Owen, my husband, or he was, for 7 years. He's this mechanic with hands always smudged with grease, this big easy grin that could light up a room, the kind of guy who'd stop everything to fix your tire in a downpour and not even grumble about it. We met way back at this diner downtown. I was carrying a tray of coffee, tripped over my own feet, and splashed it right across his shirt. I froze, cheeks burning, stammering apologies, but he just laughed deep and real, and said, "Well, that's one way to say hi." 2 weeks later, he showed up at the library with a coffee for me, black, no spill this time, and asked me out. That was Owen. Life with him wasn't some fairy tale, but it felt good, you know? Solid. Mornings, he'd be at the stove, flipping eggs, the sizzle filling the kitchen while I sat at the table, cradling my tea, steam curling up between us. Evenings, we'd flop on the couch, my feet in his lap, some dumb show flickering on the TV. Sometimes I'd catch him looking at me, his eyes soft, and he'd say, "You're my anchor, Bryn," all quiet, like it was a promise. I'd smile, squeeze his hand, and believe every word. But looking back, there were signs, little things I brushed off because I didn't want to see them. He started staying late at the shop, saying they were swamped, extra jobs piling up. I'd pack him dinners in these little Tupperware containers, scribble notes like "don't work too hard" on a sticky note, and tuck them in his lunchbox. He'd come home way past dark, and I'd catch this faint whiff of something sweet on him, not the sharp bite of oil I was used to, but something softer, like perfume maybe. I'd ask, "How was your day?" trying to keep it light, and he'd just shrug, mutter, "Same old," and crank the TV volume up. I'd sit there, running my finger along the edge of my mug, staring at the steam, wondering why his grins didn't reach his eyes anymore. My best friend, Darcy, she's this loud redhead who runs the bakery downtown, she saw it before I did. She'd come over, plop down on my couch with her boots still on, and say stuff like, "Bryn, talk to him, he's drifting." She'd lean forward, elbows on her knees, her green eyes sharp. I'd laugh, wave it off, say, "You're reading too much into it, Darce. He's just tired." But she'd squint at me, shake her head, and I'd feel this little twist in my gut. I didn't want to dig into it, you know? Like, if I poked too hard, the whole thing might crack open, and I loved our life too much to risk that. So I kept going, kept stacking books at work, kept sipping tea while he fried eggs, pretending everything was fine. But deep down, I was scared. Scared he was slipping away, scared I wasn't enough to hold him. I'd push it down, swallow it like a bitter pill, and tell myself I was just being paranoid. It was this quiet routine, though, that kept me steady. I'd wake up early, pull on my sneakers, and step out onto the porch, the swing creaking as I brushed past it. The air was cool, sharp with that Idaho bite, and I'd walk to work, cutting through streets lined with squat houses and patchy yards. At the library, I'd slide books onto shelves, the smell of old paper calming me down, while kids whispered and pages rustled. Then I'd come home, start dinner, maybe chicken and rice, something simple, and wait for Owen. Some nights, he'd walk in right on time, kick off his boots by the mat, and we'd eat together, forks scraping plates, talking about nothing big. Other nights, he'd be late, and I'd sit alone, poking at my food, the clock ticking too loud. One Sunday, Darcy showed up with a box of cinnamon rolls still warm from her oven. She shoved them at me, flour dusted on her jeans, and said, "You look like you need sugar." We sat on the couch, crumbs falling everywhere, and she asked, "How's Owen been?" I took a bite, cinnamon sticking to my fingers, and said, "Fine, I guess. Busy." She raised an eyebrow, licked icing off her thumb, and said, "Busy, huh? He's still coming home smelling like flowers. I froze mid-chew, then forced a laugh. It's probably just some new soap at the shop, I said, but my voice wobbled. She didn't push, just handed me another roll and said, "If you say so." I ate it fast, the sweetness clogging my throat, and changed the subject to her latest batch of scones. Weeks went by like that, me holding tight to what we had, ignoring the way his laugh sounded flatter, the way he'd pull his hand back when I reached for it. I'd lie awake sometimes, staring at the ceiling, his breathing steady next to me, and wonder if I was imagining it all. One night, I rolled over, rested my head on his chest and whispered, "You okay?" He shifted, arms sliding around me, and mumbled, "Yeah, Bryn. Go to sleep." His heartbeat thumped under my ear, and I closed my eyes, telling myself that was enough. But it wasn't, not really. I'd twist my hair into that bun the next morning, sip my tea, and keep moving forward, scared to look too close at the cracks spreading under my feet. Then there was this one evening, nothing special, just a regular Thursday. I was folding laundry on the couch, the TV droning some game show, when Owen came in late again. He dropped his keys on the counter, the clink sharp in the quiet, and I said, "Hey, you're home," keeping it bright. He grunted, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and sat down heavy in the recliner across the room. I folded a shirt, his shirt, running my hands over the worn cotton, and asked, "Long day?" He took a swig, eyes on the screen, and said, "Yeah, something like that." I watched him, the way his jaw tightened, the way he didn't look at me, and my fingers stilled on the fabric. "You sure you're okay?" I pressed, softer this time. He sighed, set the bottle down hard enough to slosh foam over the rim, and said, "I'm fine, Bryn. Drop it." I swallowed, picked up another shirt, and kept folding, the pile growing between us like a wall. Darcy's voice kept bouncing around in my head, "He's drifting, Bryn," but I shoved it away. I wanted to believe we were still us, still the couple who'd laughed over spilled coffee, who'd built this life together. So I stayed quiet, kept the routine going. I'd fry eggs in the morning, leave notes in his lunch, shelve books at work, and come home to that creaky swing and that patchy lawn, holding on to it all like it could save me. But that sweet smell on him those late nights, the way he'd turn away, they were there, chipping away at everything, and I was just too stubborn, or too scared, to admit it. That's where it started though, this slow slide into something I couldn't ignore anymore. And man, it only got worse from there. "Alright, let's keep this rolling, grab another coffee if you need it, because things are about to get messy." I left off with me folding laundry, trying to pretend everything was fine, even though Owen's "drop it" was still ringing in my ears. So here we go, right from that Thursday night. That moment with the laundry stuck with me, you know? I went to bed that night, sliding under the covers while Owen stayed downstairs, the TV's hum drifting up through the floor. I lay there, staring at the shadows on the ceiling, my fingers twisting the edge of the blanket. I kept replaying his voice, sharp clipped not like him, and that sweet smell that clung to his jacket when he tossed it over the chair. It wasn't oil, wasn't shop. I pressed my face into the pillow, trying to shake it off, but sleep didn't come easy. The next morning, he was up before me, frying eggs like usual, but he barely said 2 words. I sat at the table, tea steaming in my hands, and watched him shovel food down, grab his keys, and head out the door with a quick, "See ya." The truck rumbled off, and I just sat there, staring at the plate he'd left behind, yolk smeared across it like a little yellow mess. It wasn't till a couple nights later that things really started tugging at me. Owen was upstairs, shower running, and I was in the kitchen wiping down the counter. His phone was sitting there by the sink, he'd left it behind when he went up. It was face up, screen dark, and I swear I wasn't gonna touch it. I'm not that person, right? But then it buzzed, 3 times, fast, like someone was impatient. My stomach flipped hard, and I froze, sponge dripping in my hand. I leaned over just enough to see, and the screen lit up with K, just that, no name, and the words, "Can't wait to see you." My hands went cold, like I'd plunged them into snow. I stood there, water dripping onto the floor, plink plink, while my chest squeezed so tight I could barely breathe. Who was K? Why couldn't they wait to see him? I heard the shower shut off, the creak of the floorboards as he moved around upstairs, and I grabbed his phone, holding it out like it was gonna bite me. When he came down, hair damp, towel slung over his shoulder, I forced my voice to stay even and said, "Hey, who's K?" I held it out, casual as I could, but my fingers were trembling. He snatched it fast, let out this big loud laugh that bounced off the walls, and said, "Oh, just Kyle from work, talking about a car part we're hunting down." His eyes flicked to the side, away from me, and he turned to grab a glass from the cabinet, filling it with water. I watched him gulp it down, his throat bobbing, and said, "Kyle, huh?" He grunted, set the glass down, and said, "Yeah, he's a pest about this stuff." Then he brushed past me, heading for the couch, leaving me standing there with the sponge still dripping in my hand. I wanted to believe him. Kyle's this big guy at the shop, always yapping about engines, but that laugh, that dodge, it didn't sit right. After that, I couldn't unsee it. A few days later, I was chopping onions for dinner, knife thumping against the board, when I glanced out the window. Owen was in the garage, door half open, hunched over his phone, thumb moving fast across the screen. The light from it caught his face, and he had this little smirk, this curl to his lip I hadn't seen in ages, not with me anyway. I pushed the window open a crack and called out, "Dinner's ready soon." He jumped, shoved the phone in his pocket, and yelled back, "Yeah, be there." When he walked in, he had this tight smile, like he'd pasted it on, and sat down at the table. I slid him a plate, chicken and rice, and said, "You texting Kyle again?" He froze, fork halfway to his mouth, then chuckled. "Yeah, he's still on about that damn part." I watched him dig in, his jaw working, and said, "Must be some part." He just grunted, kept eating, and I let it drop, but my hand shook when I picked up my fork, rice spilling back onto the plate. Darcy came over that weekend, bursting through the door with her usual energy, sneakers thumping on the mat. She flopped onto the couch, jeans still dusted with flour, and stretched her arms over her head. I was in the kitchen, pouring iced tea, and she hollered, "So what's Owen up to today?" I walked over, handed her a glass, and sat across from her, legs tucked under me. "Shop stuff, I guess, he left early." She took a sip, set the glass down hard, ice clinked, and said, "Bryn, what's up with you? You're all fidgety." I chewed my lip, stared at the wet ring her glass left on the table, and finally said, "His phone buzzed the other night. Said Kay and can't wait to see you. He says it's Kyle, but..." I trailed off, and she slammed her hand on the cushion, making me jump. "Bryn, that's not Kyle. You know it's not, ask him straight." I pulled my knees up, hugged them tight, and said, "What if I'm wrong, Darce? What if I make it a thing and it's nothing?" She leaned forward, grabbed my shoulders, and looked me dead in the eye. "What if you're right? You gonna wait till it's too late?" I didn't say anything, just hugged my knees harder, the tea sitting untouched beside me. That night, I couldn't let it go. I sat on the couch, picking at a loose thread on the armrest, the house quiet except for the fridge humming in the kitchen. Owen wasn't home yet, and the clock kept ticking, 10, 11, midnight. I heard his truck finally roll up, gravel crunching outside, and the door creaked open. He stepped in, boots still on, and that sweet smell hit me again, not oil, something else. I looked up, voice shaking, and said, "Where you been?" He kicked his boots off, left them by the mat, and shrugged. "Shop stuff, got held up." He didn't stop, just headed upstairs, his footsteps heavy. I called after him, "Owen, it's midnight." He paused on the steps, didn't turn around, and said, "Yeah, long day," before disappearing into the bedroom. The door clicked shut, and I stayed there, tugging that thread till it snapped, feeling like a total fool. Was I chasing something that wasn't there? The next few days, it got worse. I'd catch him in the garage again, texting with his back to me, or he'd leave his phone face down on the counter, never used to do that. One morning, I slid him a plate of eggs, and he ate fast, eyes on his food, muttering about work. I tried to talk, said, "You've been busy lately, everything good?" He shrugged, said, "Yeah, fine," and grabbed his keys. I leaned over to kiss his cheek as he headed out, and that sweet smell hit me so strong I pulled back. He didn't notice, just said, "See ya," and left. I stood by the door, watching his truck peel out, pressing my hand to my chest to stop it from pounding. Darcy wouldn't let up. She'd text me, "Did you ask him yet?" And I'd dodge it, say I was swamped at work. But at the library, I'd be sliding books onto shelves, and my hands would start trembling, thinking about that K and that smirk. One afternoon, I was in the kids section, stacking picture books, when this little girl tugged my sleeve and asked, "Where's the pony books?" I forced a smile, pointed her down the row, and when she skipped off, I ducked behind a shelf, pressing my palms to my face, breathing slow. I couldn't keep acting like it was nothing, it was gnawing at me. I'd go home, sit on that creaky porch swing, and stare at the street, waiting for his truck, hoping he'd walk in and laugh it off, prove me wrong. But every night, he'd come back later quieter, that smell clinging to him, and I'd lie awake next to him, listening to him breathe, wondering who Kay was and why he wouldn't just tell me. By then, I was a mess inside, you know? I'd twist my hair into that bun every morning, tighter than usual, like it could hold me together. I'd sip my tea, fry eggs, shelve books, but it was all autopilot. Darcy kept saying, "Bryn, you've got to face it," and I'd snap, "Face what?" "He says it's nothing." But she'd just look at me, all serious, and I'd deflate. I didn't know what was worse, losing him or losing my grip on what was real. It was like I was standing on this thin edge, and one wrong step could send me falling. And trust me, that fall was coming, I just didn't see how close it was yet. Alright, let's dive back in, things are about to get real heavy, so stick with me. I left off sitting on that porch swing, teetering on the edge of something I couldn't quite name, with Darcy's words digging into me and Owen slipping further away every day. Here's what happened next. So I was stuck in this weird limbo for a week after that, twisting my hair, sipping tea, shelving books, all while this knot in my stomach grew tighter. I'd see Owen's truck pull in late, hear his boots hit the mat, and smell that sweet scent that wasn't oil, but I'd just freeze. I'd ask, "Hey, how was work?" And he'd grunt, "Fine," then head upstairs, leaving me standing there like an idiot. Darcy kept texting, "Bryn, you can't keep dodging this," and I'd shove my phone in my pocket, pretending I didn't see it. But it was eating me alive, you know? I'd lie next to him at night, staring at the ceiling, his breathing steady while my chest felt like it was caving in. I couldn't keep going like that, I had to know. It all came crashing down on a Tuesday. The sky was gray, rain spitting against the windows, and I was at the library, sliding books onto shelves, my hands shaky. I kept dropping stuff, a paperback slipped through my fingers, hit the floor with a soft thud, and I just stared at it, my throat tight. I couldn't focus, every time I closed my eyes, I saw that K on his phone, that smirk in the garage. I went to my boss, a quiet guy with glasses always perched on his nose, and said, "I'm not feeling good, can I head out early?" He looked me over, said, "You do look rough. Go home, Bryn." I grabbed my coat, the zipper snagging as I yanked it up, and bolted to my car. I drove straight to Owen's shop, rain smacking the windshield, wipers squeaking back and forth. My hands gripped the wheel so hard my knuckles turned white, and my heart was hammering like it wanted out of my chest. I pulled into the lot, his truck was there, parked crooked by the garage door, but the place was dark, no lights, no hum of tools. I sat there, engine idling, rain drumming on the roof, and dialed his number. Straight to voicemail, his voice, all casual, "Hey, it's Owen, leave a message." I hung up, my fingers fumbling, and then I saw it. His truck rolled out of a side street 2 blocks down, headlights cutting through the gray. There was someone in the passenger seat, blonde hair flashing under a streetlight. My throat closed up, like someone had jammed a fist down it. I didn't think, just shifted into gear and followed, slow, keeping my distance. The rain blurred everything, but I saw his truck turn into a diner parking lot, not our diner, the one where we met, but this other place across town, all neon and chipped paint. I pulled in a row back, cut the engine, and watched. He leaned over quick and kissed her, blonde hair, red jacket, her hand on his arm like it belonged there. It was so fast, so easy, like he'd done it 100 times. My hands clamped over my mouth, holding in whatever sound wanted out, and I sat there, rain streaking the windshield, watching them climb out and duck inside, his arm around her shoulders. I don't even remember driving home. Next thing I knew, I was in the kitchen, legs shaking so bad I slid down to the floor, back against the cabinets. I grabbed a glass of water from the sink, but my hands wouldn't stop trembling, and it just sat there in my lap, sloshing a little. The house was quiet, too quiet, except for the rain tapping the windows. I kept seeing that kiss, his arm around her, and my stomach churned so hard I thought I'd be sick. When I heard his truck pull up an hour later, gravel crunching outside, I didn't move, just sat there, glass cold against my fingers. He walked in, boots thudding on the mat, and stopped when he saw me. I looked up, voice barely a whisper, and said, "Who is she?" He froze, then let out this long sigh, running a hand through his hair. "Bryn, don't do this," he said, like I was the one making it hard. I stood up, water spilling down my jeans, and gripped the counter to keep steady. Tell me, I said louder, tears burning behind my eyes. He looked away, scuffed his boot on the floor, then finally met my gaze. Her name's Kelsey, he said flat. It's been a few months. My knees buckled, but I caught myself, the edge of the counter digging into my palms. A few months. I choked out and he shrugged, like it was nothing. Why? I asked, voice cracking, tears spilling over now. He shifted, shoved his hands in his pockets, and said, I don't know, Bryn. I needed something else. I stared at him, this guy I'd loved for 7 years, the one who'd laughed off spilled coffee, who'd called me his anchor. He didn't look like Owen anymore, his face was hard, closed off, a stranger's. My chest heaved, and I swiped at my face with my sleeve, trying to pull it together. Something else. I said, almost laughing, it hurt so bad. What does that even mean? He didn't answer, just stood there, looking at the floor. I took a step closer, hands shaking, and said, You've been lying to me. Months. And I'm just, what? Nothing. His jaw tightened, but he didn't say a word. I pointed at the door, voice breaking, and whispered, Get out. He didn't argue, grabbed his jacket from the hook, the one that still smelled like her, and walked out. The door clicked shut, and I sank back to the floor, water pooling around me, my hands pressed to my face as the sobs came hard. I don't know how long I sat there, long enough for the rain to slow, for my jeans to soak through. I kept hearing his voice, I needed something else, and seeing that kiss, her blonde hair, his arm around her. It was like everything I'd built, everything I'd trusted, just crumbled under me. I'd packed his dinners, left him notes, waited up, and he'd been with her, Kelsey, laughing, kissing, living some other life. I grabbed the glass, still half full, and hurled it at the wall. It shattered, water spraying everywhere, and I buried my face in my knees, trying to breathe through it. When I finally stood up, legs wobbly, I stumbled to the couch and curled up, pulling a blanket over me. The house felt huge, empty, no Boots by the door, no clatter of him in the kitchen. I didn't sleep, just lay there, eyes burning, replaying it all. Who was Kelsey? How long had he been lying? Why wasn't I enough? My phone buzzed on the coffee table, Darcy probably, but I couldn't touch it. I just stared at the ceiling, the shadows shifting as the rain faded, feeling like I'd lost more than him, like I'd lost me too. And that's when I knew it wasn't over yet, not really. I had to figure out how to keep going, even with all this broken glass around me. Alright, let's pick it back up. Things are raw now, so bear with me as I walk you through what came next. I left off curled on the couch, that empty house pressing in, with glass shattered on the floor and my whole world feeling like it had been ripped apart. Here's how it went from there. I woke up the next morning still on the couch, blanket tangled around my legs, my eyes so swollen they felt like they'd been glued shut. The house was dead quiet, no hiss of the frying pan, no clink of Owen's keys, just this heavy stillness that made my ears ring. I sat up slow, my neck stiff, and looked around. His boots weren't by the mat, his jacket was gone from the hook, and that hit me harder than I expected. I pressed my hands to my face, trying to rub away the ache, but my throat was raw, like I'd swallowed sandpaper. I shuffled to the kitchen, stepping over the broken glass, little shards glinting in the weak morning light, and grabbed my phone off the counter. 3 missed calls from Darcy, a text that said, You okay? Call me. My fingers hovered over the screen, trembling, then I dialed her, my voice cracking as soon as she picked up. He's gone, I said, and that was all it took. I was crying again, big messy sobs. Darcy didn't say much, just, I'm coming over, and hung up. 20 minutes later, she burst through the door, arms full of a bakery box, her red hair wild like she'd run the whole way. She dropped the box on the coffee table, knelt in front of me, and pulled me into a hug so tight I could feel her heartbeat. You're enough, Bryn, you hear me? She said, her voice fierce against my ear. I clung to her, face buried in her shoulder, and mumbled, I don't feel like it. She pulled back, grabbed my face with both hands, and said, He's an idiot. You're enough. I couldn't look at her, just stared at my lap, tears dripping onto my jeans, but she stayed right there, rubbing my back till I could breathe again. I kept seeing it though, that kiss in the diner parking lot, his arm around Kelsey, her blonde hair catching the light. And his voice, I needed something else, kept playing on a loop, stabbing at me every time. I got up, shaky, and grabbed a broom from the closet, sweeping up the glass while Darcy watched, arms crossed. "What happened here?" she asked, pointing at the mess. I dumped the shards in the trash, the clink loud in the quiet, and said, "Through a glass. Felt good for a second." She smirked, said, "Should have thrown it at him," and I let out this weak laugh, the first one in hours. She opened the bakery box, muffins, still warm, and shoved one at me. "Eat," she said. I took it, picked at the edges, but my stomach wouldn't settle. Going to work that day was brutal. I dragged myself to the library, hair twisted up, coat zipped to my chin. My hands shook as I slid books onto shelves, and every time someone walked by, I flinched, like they could see right through me. A kid, maybe 7, tugged my sleeve and asked, "Where's the dinosaur books?" I forced a smile, pointed him down the aisle, and said, "Right over there, bud." He ran off, and I ducked into the break room, sinking into a chair, pressing my palms to my eyes till the tears stopped leaking out. My boss peeked in, said, "You sure you're okay to be here?" I waved him off, said, "I'm fine," but my voice sounded like it belonged to someone else. I stayed anyway, kept shelving, kept moving, because sitting still hurt worse. Days started blurring after that. I'd wake up, stare at the ceiling, then shuffle to the kitchen, stepping around where his boots used to sit. I'd make tea, but it'd go cold while I sat at the table, tracing the wood grain with my finger. One afternoon, I was digging through the closet for a sweater and found his coat, old denim, frayed at the cuffs, stuffed in the back. I pulled it out, and there it was, a receipt crumpled in the pocket, dated a month ago, dinner for 2 at that diner. My hand shook as I unfolded it, 2 burgers, 2 Cokes, $23.47, and I could see him there with her, laughing while I was home packing his lunch. I grabbed a lighter from the drawer, held the receipt over the sink, and lit it, watching the edges curl black, ash drifting down. The smoke stung my eyes, but I didn't care, just stood there till it was gone. Darcy wouldn't let me wallow. She showed up a few days later, banging on the door till I let her in. "Get your shoes," she said, hands on her hips. "We're going to the bakery." I groaned, slumped on the couch, and said, "I don't wanna." She yanked the blanket off me, said, "Too bad," and dragged me out. At her shop, she shoved an apron at me, flour puffing everywhere, and said, "Need this." I glared at her, but tied it on, plunging my hands into the dough. I punched it hard, over and over, my arms burning, and she watched, leaning against the counter. "Feel better?" she asked. I slammed the dough down, said no. "I don't feel tough, Darce," and my voice broke. She stepped over, wrapped her arms around me, flour smudging my shirt, and I cried again, right there in the middle of her kitchen. I stopped sleeping in our bed after that. It felt wrong, like a lie I couldn't climb into. I hauled a pillow and blanket to the guest room, curling up on the lumpy mattress, staring at the wall. The house felt too big without him, every creak, every hum of the fridge, louder than it should have been. I'd lie there, hands clenched under the blanket, wondering who I was now. I'd tied so much of me to us, to him, and now it was just gone. I'd see his face in my head, here I needed something else, and dig my nails into my palms, trying to push it away. But it wouldn't leave. People started showing up though, small things that kept me from sinking. The neighbor across the street, Mrs. Tate, left a casserole on my porch, a little note taped to it, "Hang in there, sweetie." I ate it cold, straight from the dish, fork scraping the bottom. Darcy kept coming over, dragging me out or just sitting with me, cracking dumb jokes. One night, she sprawled on my couch, feet up, and said, "You hear about the guy who tried to rob my shop with a baguette?" I snorted, said, "What?" She grinned, "Yeah, I just needed him into next week." I laughed, small, shaky but real, and she punched my arm, said, "There's my Bryn." I rubbed my eyes, said, "Maybe," and she stayed till I fell asleep, the TV flickering in the dark. It wasn't much, but it was something. I'd get up, twist my hair into that bun, sip cold tea, shelve books with hands that shook less each day. I'd walk home, past that patchy lawn, and sit on the porch swing, letting it creak under me. I wasn't okay, not even close, but I wasn't gone yet. Darcy, Mrs. Tate, that stupid baguette joke, they were threads holding me together, keeping me from unraveling completely. But I still didn't know what was next, didn't know he'd come back, didn't know how it'd all end. That part was still waiting for me, just around the corner. All right, here we go, this is the last stretch, and it's a doozy, so hang on tight. I left off on that porch swing, piecing myself together bit by bit, not knowing Owen was about to walk back in and flip everything one more time. Let's get into it. So, I was starting to find my footing, you know? Not big steps, just little ones, sipping tea without letting it go cold, shelving books without my hand shaking, laughing at Darcy's dumb jokes. It was a Friday, 3 weeks after that awful Tuesday when I'd seen him kiss Kelsey in the diner lot. I'd just gotten home from the grocery store, arms loaded with bags, bread, milk, apples, stuff to keep me going. I kicked the door open with my foot, the house smelling like rain from a window I'd left cracked. I was setting the bags on the counter, humming some tune I didn't even recognize when I heard it, his truck rumbling up the drive, gravel crunching loud enough to stop me cold. My stomach flipped, hard, and I gripped the edge of the counter, bags still half unpacked. The door creaked open, and there he was, Owen, stepping inside like he still lived here, a duffel bag slung over his shoulder. His boots were gone from the mat, hadn't been there in weeks, but he was on the phone, laughing this low, easy laugh I hadn't heard in forever. She's just not the one I wanted, he said, voice carrying down the hall, and I knew he was talking to her, Kelsey. Then he saw me standing there, froze mid-step, and hung up fast, shoving the phone in his pocket. He smirked, this sharp, unfamiliar twist of his lips, and said, "Hey Bryn. I'm just here to get my stuff." "No sorry, no, how you holding up?" Just that, like I was a pit stop. I set the milk down slow, my hand steady for the first time in weeks, and said, "Take it and go." My voice didn't shake, didn't crack, and that surprised me more than him showing up. He brushed past me, heading upstairs, and I stayed put, unpacking groceries like it was any other day, bread in the pantry, apples in the bowl. I heard him up there, thumping around, drawers opening and shutting, the closet door banging against the wall. My chest tightened, but I kept moving, folding the paper bags, stacking them neat under the sink. He came back down, duffel heavier now, stuffed with shirts and socks, his old toolbox clanking in his other hand. There was a photo on top of the pile, us at the lake years ago, me squinting in the sun, him grinning with his arm around me. He didn't pack it, just left it sitting on the counter, corners curling up. I stared at it, my throat burning, but I didn't touch it. He stopped by the door, turned back, and looked at me, really looked like he hadn't in months. "You're just not the one I wanted, Bryn," he said, quiet but clear, like he needed me to hear it one more time. It hit like a slap, sharp and stinging, but I didn't flinch. I crossed my arms, leaned against the counter, and said, "I know. Bye, Owen." My voice was flat, steady, and his smirk faded, just for a second, like he hadn't expected that. He shifted the duffel, gave me one last look, eyes dark, unreadable, then walked out. The door clicked shut, his truck roared to life, and I stood there, listening to it fade down the street, rain tapping soft on the roof. I didn't cry, not then. I finished unpacking, milk in the fridge, bread on the shelf, and grabbed a mug from the cabinet, filling it with water for tea. My hands didn't shake, didn't falter, and I carried it to the porch swing, settling in as it creaked under me. The air was damp, cool, and I sat there, mug warm between my palms, watching the street blur through the drizzle. His words hung there, "You're just not the one I wanted," but they didn't cut as deep as they should have. I'd heard them before, felt them rip me open, but now? Now they were just words, his words, not mine. My phone buzzed in my pocket, Darcy, right on time. I answered and she said, "Hey, you good?" I took a sip of tea, the steam curling up, and said, "He's gone for good." She whooped, loud enough I had to pull the phone back, and said, "Good riddance. You okay?" I smiled, small but mine, and said, "Yeah, I think so." She laughed, said, "Damn right you are. I'm bringing pizza later, pepperoni, no arguments." I chuckled, said, "Fine," and hung up, resting my head back against the swing. The creak filled the quiet, steady and slow, and I let it rock me, rain pattering around. That night, Darcy showed up with the pizza, grease spotting the box, and we sprawled on the couch, eating straight from it. She kicked her feet up, said, "So he's really out?" I tore off a bite, cheese stretching, and said, "Yeah." Took his stuff, said that crap about me not being the one, and left. She snorted, wiped sauce off her chin, and said, "What a jerk. You're better off, Bryn." I leaned back, staring at the ceiling, and said, "Maybe." She punched my arm, light but firm, and said, "Not maybe, definitely." I rubbed the spot, smirking, and we finished the pizza, the TV flickering some old movie neither of us cared about. Later, after she'd gone, I stood in the kitchen, washing the mug in the sink. The house was quiet again, no Boots, no truck, no Owen, but it didn't feel as empty. I dried my hands, hung the towel on the rack, and walked to the guest room, curling up under the blanket. I'd loved him, God, I'd loved him, with everything I had, poured 7 years into us, and he'd walked away like it was nothing. But I was still here, still breathing, moving, living. The hurt was there, sharp in my chest, but it didn't own me, not anymore. The next morning I got up, twisted my hair into that messy bun, and made tea, sipping it hot this time. I stepped outside, the swing creaking as I brushed past, and walked to work, the air crisp, the lawn patchy but mine. At the library, I shelved books, smiled at a kid asking for sharks, and felt lighter, like I'd shed something heavy. Darcy texted me, "You're tougher than you think," and I typed back, "Getting there," with a little smiley face. I wasn't fixed, not all the way, but I was starting to figure out who I was without him, starting to choose me. That's what it came down to, you know? Picking up the pieces when the life I'd built fell apart, finding out who I was when the guy I trusted most turned into someone I didn't know. He left me for her, for Kelsey, said I wasn't what he wanted, but I'm still standing. The rain stopped that day, sun peeking through, and I sat on that swing again, tea in hand, feeling like maybe, just maybe, this wasn't the end of me. It was the start.